constant rhetoric about this, which is correct, is that Israel has a right of self-defense, which it certainly does. Everyone has a right of self-defense. But there's a little proviso. Do you have the right of self-defense by force, by violence? Well, the answer is only if you've exhausted peaceful means. In this case, peaceful means not only were not exhausted, they weren't even tried. So therefore, it's no right of force in self-defense. The U.S.-Israeli attack was just a plain war crime of aggression, period, disproportionate or not. Well, again, that's one of those things you don't talk about, but the facts are straightforward. The attack was awful. I won't go into it. The siege afterwards was maintained. A couple of months ago, there was an attack on a ship, a Turkish-flagged ship, by Israeli forces, the Mave Marmara. It was attacked in international waters. That's piracy. Israel also killed 9 people in the attack, Turkish citizens, 1 American citizen. That caused great anger in Turkey, and a lot of furor around the world. There was also a reaction in the United States. Congress overwhelmingly approved the attack. Israel's kind of surprised by the international reaction, and with a certain amount of justice, because Israel's been carrying out piracy and hijacking on the high seas for about 30 years, attacking ships, traveling from Cyprus to Lebanon, killing people, kidnapping people, bringing them to Israeli prisons where they are often held as hostages for a long period. So what's the fuss? We've been doing this for decades. Why are you making a fuss about this? So there's some justification in Israel's surprise at the reaction, except in the United States where there's no reaction. Well, there was enough international protest so that Israel officially said that they would ease the blockade, the siege. There's a report that came out shortly after, a couple of months afterwards, by a coalition of international aid groups, Oxfam, Red Cross, and so on. And they concluded that almost nothing had been done. I'll just read the wording of the director of Amnesty International. The so-called easing of the Gaza blockade does not change the fact that there's still a cruel and illegal blockade, collectively punishing the entire civilian population. The only real easing has been the easing of pressure on the Israeli authorities to end this cruel and illegal practice. Well, again, there's a qualification. There's been no easing of the pressure here because it's logically impossible. The U.S. exerts no pressure, so there's nothing to ease. In fact, not only that, it participates directly in the crimes. So what we're seeing is a rare event in history. A leading Israeli sociologist called it politicide, the deliberate murder of a nation. Not much like that. I'll just say a word about what lies behind this. There are many factors. The obvious question is, why is the United States standing against the world in blocking a political settlement for 35 years, when there is one? Now, there are many factors. One is what I mentioned earlier. Israel was performing and continues to perform major services for the U.S. in the region and later elsewhere. There are strategic reasons. In the last 40 years, there have been growing military and intelligence connections which are extremely close. So close, in fact, that another WikiLeaks exposure was a list of sites throughout the world that the United States considers essential for strategic purposes. One of them is right near Haifa, town of Haifa in Israel, the headquarters of Rafael Military Industries, one of Israel's major military industries. That's a major strategic site for the United States. In fact, connections are so close that Rafael has moved a lot of its management offices to Washington, where they can more easily obtain grants, set up research and development relations, and so on. It goes beyond military industry is very closely related to Israel, Lockheed Martin and others. And it goes beyond to high-tech industry generally, which is quite supportive of Israel and invests there increasingly. One of the most striking cases is Intel, the leading chip manufacturer in the world. It has now designed a new generation of chips, which it assumes will take over the global market, and the main factory for producing them is in Israel. And that extends quite widely with substantial support. So these are the reasons why, if you take a look at public support for Israeli atrocities in the United States, it's very closely related to the business community. The most extreme support in the press is from the Wall Street Journal, the journal of the business community. The Republican Party, which is just so deep in the pockets of the business world, you need a telescope to find them at this point. They're the most extreme in support of Israeli crimes and aggression. Democrats are highly supportive, but Republicans more so. And it reflects the attitude of the business world towards their Israeli ally and client, along with military and intelligence. There's much more than that. It's not usually understood that Christian Zionism goes back way before Jewish Zionism and is extremely powerful in England, but primarily in the United States. The United States is off the international spectrum in religious extremism by just about any measure you can think of. So a third of the population, for example, considers that every word of the Bible is literally true, including the words that say God promised the land, Palestine, to the Jews. And that's not just kind of end times and evangelicals. That's mainstream elite opinion. When the British general Allenby conquered Jerusalem from the Turks in 1917, you could read in the Washington Post and the New York Times that this was Richard the Lionhearted finally driving the pagans out of our country, the Holy Land. It was the Crusades were finally vindicated. He was called Richard the Lionhearted, General Allenby, honored for that. Woodrow Wilson, progressive president at the time, he read the Bible every morning. He was deeply immersed in Orthodox Christianity. And for him, return of the Jews to Palestine was, that's God's will. Same went on through the Roosevelt administration. One of Roosevelt's leading advisors, Harold Ickes, described Jewish colonization as an achievement without comparison in the history of the human race. And so it continues through elite circles. It's a significant factor. And of course, the extreme evangelical circles, which are a pretty big part of the United States, is a passionate supporter of Israeli crimes. They're also extremely anti-Semitic. They're the most anti-Semitic group in the world. If you read their doctrines, all of this is supposed to lead to Armageddon, at which point everybody's destroyed except those who have been saved and they rise to heaven. Among the Jews, 144,000 are saved. The number, I suppose, comes somehow from the 12 tribes, but whatever it is. 144,000 are saved, the rest are condemned to eternal damnation. I mean, even Hitler didn't go that far. But they're the strongest supporters of Israeli actions. So that's all substantial. Also, there's a kind of an intuitive support for Israel among the general population. Israel's a settler colonial society. That's the worst kind of imperialism. Traditional imperialism sort of leaves the population there and rules over them. But settler colonialism eliminates the population, and that's our history, after all. We're a settler colonial society. The Pilgrims and their successors effectively exterminated the indigenous population. In fact, extermination is a term that was used by founding fathers. They're mostly gone. And that's considered very noble, it's part of our heritage. And the recognition that Israel's kind of following something like the same course, it kind of strikes a chord in the American population, gives a kind of instinctive sympathy. Now, there's also a big Israeli lobby, one of the most influential in Washington, though in fact it's dwarfed by the military lobby and the business lobbies. Well, without going on, there's a lot of support for these rejectionist policies, and that means there's going to be a lot of work to do to try to overcome them, but it also means that the roadblock there is a straightforward solution attainable to the Israel-Palestine conflict, not a very beautiful solution in my opinion. It should be only my own view, a path towards something better, but it's there in the short term. There's a roadblock. The roadblock is right here, and that's actually an optimistic conclusion because it means we can do something about it.